Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming. My name is Anmol, I'm a postdoctoral scholar here. Happy to be the moderator for today's mentorship session. I'll start with a territorial land acknowledgement. So the University of Calgary, located in the heart of Southern Alberta, both acknowledges and pays tribute to the traditional territories of the peoples of Treaty 7, which include the Blackfoot Confederacy, comprised of the Siksika, the Piikani, and the Kainai First Nations, the Tsuut'ina First Nation, and the Stoney Nakoda First Nations. The city of Calgary is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Districts 5 and 6. So today's session will be about effective mentorship, must-dos and don'ts. This talk will provide an insightful guide on the key do's and don'ts of effective mentorship, emphasizing the importance of fostering trust, clear communication, and mutual growth. We hope that attendees will learn how to create a supportive environment that empowers mentees while avoiding common pitfalls that can hinder progress. Practical tips and real-world examples will help mentors refine their approach, ensuring a positive and impactful mentoring relationship. Questions are very welcome at the end. We'll try to start questions at 12:40. So about our panelists, we have some excellent individuals here. So Tiffany Boulton. So Tiffany is an associate professor teaching in community rehabilitation and disability studies program in the Department of Community Health Sciences. She's also a graduate student supervisor for CHS. Tiffany has a PhD in sociology and social policy from the University of Leeds, and her background is in disability studies and the sociology of health and illness. Her research focuses on the intersections of gender and health, with a specific interest in the areas of invisible disabilities, mental health, and maternity care. Her research is informed by critical disability and feminist theories, and she uses qualitative and participatory research methods, working in partnership with communities to identify and address the structural barriers marginalized people experience in the healthcare system when accessing mental health and disability services and in education and workplace settings. Tiffany is also a trained birth and postpartum doula and the co-founder of the Radical Mental Health Doula Program, which is a social innovation project aimed at creating a new type of doula to support people with mental health challenges. Welcome, Tiffany. Thanks for being here. Next, I will introduce Dr. Paul Ronksley. So Paul is an associate professor and health services researcher in the the Department of Community Health Sciences. He's also an associate scientific director for the health systems portfolio within the O'Brien Institute for Public Health. Paul completed his PhD in epidemiology from UCalgary and a postdoc in clinical epidemiology at the Ottawa Hospital Research Institute. His work focuses on improving access and quality of care for patients living with multiple chronic conditions. He also teaches advanced epidemiology and the systematic reviews and meta-analysis course here at the university. So thank you, Paul. And next I'll introduce Levi. Please say your last name.
Frehlich.
Frehlich. I apologize.
Okay.
Levi holds a BSc honors in kinesiology, during which he researched the dietary patterns of undergraduate students. He went on to earn a master's in population public health, where he developed a tool to measure neighborhood-based physical activity. Levi completed his academic journey with a PhD in epidemiology, exploring the relationship between the built environment and health-related fitness. In addition to his academic achievements, Levi is co-principal investigator on the, I apologize if I pronounced it wrong, Makuyoskoi program, a holistic, culturally relevant wellness initiative for Indigenous women in urban, rural, and remote communities. He has also served as co-president for the Calgary chapter of Obesity Canada and founded the Calgary Student and New Professional Chapter of Obesity Canada. Currently, Levi is a research director of the Alberta Kinesiology Association and a member of the Stanford Lifestyle Medicine Program. Beyond his academic and advocacy roles, Levi runs Luxury Nutrition and Fitness, a health blog dedicated to sharing research on physical activity, nutrition, and health with the general public. So thanks, Levi, for being here. And next, I'd like to introduce Benedicta Antepimand, right? Okay. Benedicta is a doctoral candidate in health services research, where her work focuses on examining inequities in the use and outcomes of obstetric interventions and the role of shared decision-making for Black birthing people. Benedicta is a mixed methods researcher with a multidisciplinary background in anthropology, psychology, and educational research. She is passionate about improving health equity through community-engaged research. So thank you so much, Benedicta, for being here. We have a couple of questions, and Would love to start with those. So, to all the panelists who are here today, what do you consider to be traits of impactful mentors? Feel free to speak from your experience with individuals who have been in mentorship positions, but also people who are in mentee positions. So I guess maybe we can start on one side of the table. Paul, if you want to take a crack at it first.
Yeah, sure. I think I've been very fortunate to have trained with amazing mentors, and now as part of my job, one of the best parts is being able to mentor new trainees and junior faculty members. So when I think about the traits of a mentor, I think the first thing that really comes up is a characteristic that's really about this mentor is about passionate about helping other people and really finding ways to build up that person in a sense. And so there's obviously a passion to help others and help that person succeed, but there's also personal traits that I feel are really important. And oftentimes that comes down to being a great listener. So not just someone that can say, here's what you should do, but maybe here's some things to consider if you want to succeed in this space. There's probably also a big part around understanding in an academic environment this concept of this power dynamic that often happens where, as a trainee, you might feel intimidated to talk to a supervisor, and maybe even as a junior faculty member, talking to a senior investigator. And so maybe a great mentor finds ways to break down those barriers and find a safe space to talk through things and build a trusting environment where you can ask dumb questions, which is oftentimes what we need, or just having a space where you can just talk through things that are often very difficult. So I think it's a combination of passion for helping others succeed and also personality traits that make that happen. So I think that's how it's summarized in a sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree with that. And Levi, please add on to that as your experience as a mentor and mentee.
I think being authentic is great as well, and showing people you're trying to mentor that you've had struggles as well. So they're coming to you for advice, so you can tell them, this was my journey, this is what worked, what didn't work. So I think that authenticity on top of everything that Paul said really comes out as well.
Yeah, just before the panel, we were all talking about why did we get asked to do this? Like, I don't know, are we experts in being mentors? I don't know. Because often when we think of mentors, we think of like the wise old sage. I'm like Paul, you're closer to that, but I know. But no, I was not quite you, like more like a Dumbledore. Okay. older than you. But then I was reflecting on, sort of, what I look for in like a mentor, as well as what I try to embody as a mentor. And then I was also thinking about Benn is the TA for the course that I've taught a couple of years on communication skills. And that's about communication skills, but it's also about helping professionals. And so it's a lot of what you were saying, Paul, like being a good mentor is really having those helping skills. So yeah, being competent in your area and your expertise and having that wisdom is really important. But if you can't create a safe space for people to talk and you're not listening and you're not providing individualized support, then you can have all the wisdom in the world. So I think the relationship is really key in being able to have empathy, compassion, and kindness, which sounds sometimes cliche, I think, when we think about compassion and kindness, but in my experience, that's been the most impactful for me, to have a mentor that's compassionate and understanding. And I try to do that in my mentorship role as well.
I think I would echo a lot of what everybody has said, and add to that like the two key things that come to mind, both from like a mentor and a mentee perspective, is having a mentor that is really like truly invested in your growth and development as a person, as a professionalist, whatever context of your mentorship relationship is. And I think adding on to what Tiffany and I think Levi mentioned as well, is having a mentorship relationship that is adaptive to who the mentee is. And so I think particularly the academic context and in the more sort of formal mentorship relationships that we enter here, there is a tendency to, I think, approach mentees as having very similar goals, very similar motivations. But I think making an effort to understand mentees and mentors as whole people, and to understand their individual circumstances, their individual motivations, their individual goals, and adjusting mentorship and guidance to fit that person. I felt like that has been some of the most impactful mentorship relationships that I've had. So I would say those were two sort of key traits that I felt were really important for the thriving of those relationships.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone. I agree with all of those traits. And I'll start off with, so what are some key strategies that mentors can use to ensure open communication and build trust with their mentees throughout the mentorship process? So feel free, whoever wants to speak first, please do.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I was just gonna say, I think being a mentor in academia is a little bit different too than quote unquote the real world, right? Because you're also the boss, like the supervisor is also the boss, where a lot of times that sometimes in the business world they are different roles, the mentor and the boss, right? So you're also, you need to structure, okay, well, you need to get these things done, but you also need to structure, how can we grow you to almost be my equal after, right? Or in your own career trajectory. So I think being able to flirt that line is really important, for sure.
I was gonna say, I like to show a mentee that I want them to succeed. And oftentimes when I take on a new student, first thing that I'll ask is, what do you want to get out of your degree or your training? The second question is, how can I help you get there? And what do you need from me? And sometimes they might not know, sometimes we find that out as we go along, but it opens up a level of trust to say that I'm here to help you in that journey. That's a great way to start building trust as a mentor. The second part was about listening. We've already talked about that. And I think that when I reflect on my own mentors that I've had, so one of them being Benedicta, who was my PhD supervisor, I'd always come to her and I'd want like an answer, like, Benedicta, just tell me what to do. And I never got an answer. Like, it was always like, well, Paul, have you thought about the pros and cons of this? Or have you thought about like this or that? And it was frustrating, but at the same time, it was empowering. It put it back on me to make decisions and move forward, as opposed to having overly directive in terms of what to do. So I think those are two things that were really important in terms of building that trust, and putting it back on me to succeed in a sense.
Yeah, that just makes me think of, another piece is I try to remind myself it's not about me as the mentor. So it really is like, creating open communication with the mentee who knows that you're invested in their growth and their strengths and their needs and goals. And so it's not about, you're just, I'm your mentor because you're going to work on this project for me, right? It's like, well, what's your path? And it's not going to look the same as the one that I took. And so how can I support you to do that?
I think in terms of like building trust and building safety in some of these relationships, it'd be something that I think has sort of been mentioned, but to build on is I think sort of the mentors being able to be vulnerable about their own journeys. I think in the academy, particularly, you sort of encounter these mentors that you really respect, you really admire, and you see their careers and might want to emulate that for yourself. And you kind of just see the successes and like the outcomes of that. And you maybe don't see their full journey or, the sacrifices they made or what those successes cost. And I think having a mentorship relationship where the mentors are at least in some ways like open about that and open about their journeys, I think makes it a little bit less impossible and also understands their journey a little bit more. Sometimes I'll see some of these people and I always joke that I feel like they have the same time management as like Beyonce. Like we do not have the same 24 hours in a day. But I think having the vulnerability from mentors to sort of bring that to the table first allows the mentee to then open up a little bit more and create sort of safety and trust in that relationship. And so I guess have more, frame conversations about like what it does take and whether those are sacrifices you're willing to make for yourself, and really I think humanizing mentors almost.
Yeah.
That's the word I think really can build trust in that situation. So yeah.
But that's a skill set too, right? Like to be vulnerable, and a lot of people are not that in the academic world. It makes it hard to find mentors in that space because of the fact that you see this person as a successful academic, see the person behind that, and sometimes they're not willing to show that side of them, which makes it hard to make that relationship.
Yeah, it's hard as a mentee to bring that vulnerability to the table without it being reciprocated.
Yeah,
Because then you're just like crying by yourself.
Yeah.
That's not cute. No.
Can we ask what
Of
course.
To the time. Absolutely. We have some time set apart for questions, but if you want to jump in, you're welcome to.
It's small.
Yeah.
You're jump in.
Which related to the discussion, so I don't want to get lost on my head, if I wait longer, but so something that Levi mentioned is that the mentor is. And so that brings a question on my head, so do mentees see us as losses and how that affect the mentorship relationship?
I would say from my, so I had the same supervisor for my master's and my PhD, so we been together a lot. And I would say, hopefully, so you might hear this. I would say the relationship grows, right? So definitely when it first starts, it's kind of, they are the boss, right? And like, this is the project, this is what you gotta do.
So that the power imbalance.
Yeah, but then as
you.
you,
When it starts, then
Yeah.
look at the trajectory. of
and then
it.
as you work together you start to get to know each other more, and you get more comfortable with asking questions and maybe developing that relationship a little bit more than just, oh, he's my boss, he's a friend almost, right, too, right? And then you can help me.
So it takes time to get to the mentorship then.
I would think so, yeah. But you also don't have to have your. We could talk about this too, but I don't think the supervisor has to be a mentor. Like your supervisor is there to get your degree, I guess, if that's what your goal is. I think it's beneficial if they are also a mentor. But you can also find mentorship in
Yeah,
other
yeah,
places, right?
absolutely, yeah. No, but I'm just focusing on that dyad relationship. But for example, if someone set up the welcoming of the students, like all this bracket, and how can I help you and
Yeah.
get them? Then that somehow you're breaking with that power balance get go and open the mentorship. Right?
Yeah, actually personal experience, like last week even, I we have the person that's working for a project for us. And I said, hey, I'm happy to answer questions about other things other than this project as well, if you want to know anything. She's like, oh yeah, I might answer if something pops up. And like 5 minutes after, she started opening up and we had like a 20-minute conversation about what she wants to do after this project, right? So yeah, it can happen quick.
That's a terrific continuation to the question, and to build on that, so, yes, I guess you start seeing somebody as a boss, if you start off as a mentor, you're building on, all the points that have been brought up, but like, how do you start to build a personal relationship, I guess, in terms of what's appropriate between mentors and mentees, and how important is that, in terms of how you feel as a mentor or as a mentee, and in the amount of success that you can achieve together?
I'm just going back to Maria's point there. Like, we think of mentorship a lot in terms of this like classic dyad, where it's like a supervisor and a student. Whereas a lot of times there's pure mentorship is a huge part of what we do, especially in academia. And I think about when I started at the same time as Carrie McBride, Tyler Williamson, and Gabe Faber. When the four of us met all the time, we all had very different skill sets. And we would learn from one another and we'd work together. We built a relationship that way because we all want to see each other succeed. And I think that there was a kind of a different approach in that we worked together and built up this personal trust with one another. And that's lasted our entire career. And it changed. So we're no longer our mentors. But at the time, that was what we needed. We needed some peer mentorship. And at the same time, we always think that we can only have one mentor. And we can have multiple mentors. I had, as a PhD student, I had a junior mentor and a senior mentor, someone that could give me that 30,000-foot view, and someone that was in the weeds and could tell me what it looks like to be an academic on a day-to-day basis. So I think that we have to start thinking of what that mold, like break the mold of just senior and junior, and just thinking about it broader in this space. But that's my take on it. Thanks.
Yeah, I can't remember the name of the person else, that's gonna drive me crazy, but they were talking about the need for a board of directors. And so I think that with mentoring as well. And so some relationships, like if we get back to kind of the question around relationships, is yeah, you might have a mentor that you have a more personal relationship with in terms of like the same reality TV shows. But it doesn't mean that that's going to be, you're going to have those relationships with all of your mentors. And one of my mentors was really just like, during my postdoc said to me, I'm going to help you get a tenure track position. And we really haven't stayed in touch that much since, but like, he was just like, this is what I'm going to like help and mentor you through. And so was a very different relationship than the one that I have with a mentor who was my master's supervisor and then I did postdoc with, and you know, it's evolved over time. So I think it's a bit of a tricky question in terms of like, does it always have to be a really personal relationship? Because I think it depends. And I think I think a good mentor too would help you with that board of directors and help you connect to other people that can provide those other perspectives and support.
I really agree with that. I think like there's a lot of value in having mentors for different contexts of different things. And like you said, your supervisor doesn't have to be a mentor. They're there to get you through the program. And it's great if you develop that relationship, but it's also important, I think, especially in the academy, to have mentors outside of that, and mentors who you like respect in different spaces. And I don't think you have to have a personal relationship for there to be a valuable mentorship, but I do think that mentorships with personal relationships are the ones that last past the context that it first existed in. There are mentors that I, met in a work context or a school context, but because of that personal relationship, I still check in with them. I still ask about my career with them, irrespective of whether it's in academia or not. And it like broadens, I think, the relationship, and there are people that you respect and that you appreciate their guidance, you value their opinions outside of this particular area of expertise maybe that they're in. So I think the personal relationship is what allows for a more depthful is not a word, but more meaningful, thank you, a more meaningful relationship and a long-lasting mentorship relationship, which I think is really just sort of impactful across your entire life course as well. So
That's perfect.
I think to Paul's first point, though, I do think that openness should initially come from the mentor.
Yep.
Because it'd be hard for the mentee to start that, but as long as the mentor is open to it, then the mentee can kind of push and throw a little bit. Yeah.
I think related to that, you were talking about sort of that shift in relationship. And I'm thinking of one particular mentor that I've had where they were definitely my boss. Like I was working for them, but the ways in which they approached that relationship initially, it never felt like that.
Right.
They sort of approached it almost, I think, like treating me like an equal and allowing me to grow and sort of respecting sort of your opinion in that space and really allowing you to take ownership of whatever it is that you were working on. Like they came with that energy. And so even though I was working for them, there was this relationship, it started off at a space where I just respected them as a mentor. And though I I answered to them in that way, they sort of approached it with like this level of respect and equalship that I think really built the relationship from the beginning. So it was never even an issue where we had to sort of shift that relationship from boss to mentorship. It started out with a mentorship energy without me even saying anything. Just I often joke that sometimes I think I like force mentors onto me. At some point I'm like, I think you're my mentor, right? Like this is happening and they did not ask for it. I did not ask for it, but it just sort of ended up like that. So I think like having seniors who come in with that energy initially allows you to open up and build that relationship to begin with as well.
I'd agree with that, and I'd love to ask a probing question after that, and the audience, please feel free to jump in. So as a mentor, actionable advice for all people who are listening to better create a relationship with your mentee, and vice versa as a mentee. If any of us are in that position where we want to have a little bit more of a connection with our mentors and mentees, what can we do? What has worked out for you? I know the balance is delicate, and you want to be careful and professional, but any advice that you would have would be terrific.
Yes, go ahead.
I was thinking, like, for me, words are powerful and words of affirmation are very important. Sometimes people need that. And as a student, that's very important to hear. You know what, you're really good at doing this. I really admire this about you. And sometimes just providing that self-confidence to move forward in this space is really helpful. But as a mentor, to know if you ever need help, I'm here to help you in that space. But I always start with the positive and say, oh, these are really great skills that you have. And I think you can do this. Why don't you try this? And then, but know that I'm here as an option. And that's what I try to do to try to make that connection.
Oh, yeah, I would say not to get like all LinkedIn and like business school with it, right? I'm so not in that space. But I think, especially for, I think, maintaining mentorship relationships past the context that originated in, like scheduling those informal coffee chats, as the business school people call it. And it doesn't have to be like, I think, super frequent, but just checking in, I don't know, twice a year, once a year, just to update them on your life and what's happening, I think is also a good way to like maintain that mentorship and build those more personal relationships and take it beyond the context that originated it if it calls for it. But I think just like making the effort to reach out to your mentors and to your mentees as well, that you like exist and are available to support and guide them beyond where they met you and beyond what you were supporting.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to those communication skills and a bunch of listening right off the bat. And I think you have to also mean it, right? Be intentional about asking, like, how are you doing? And I start off all of my advising meetings with graduate students in that way. And I'm like, no, I mean it. Like, what's going on with you? How, outside of this like academic sphere and the issue at hand, like, how are you doing? What else is going on in your life? And like, and I also, Ben knows, use like some self-disclosure. Sometimes I'm willing to get vulnerable and be like, oh, I had a similar experience, not to bring it about me, but to be like, I'm human too. And I get that. I get what you're going through. And I think those can make really meaningful connections. Because it's like, oh, said it's not all just success.
Yeah.
Like, there's lots of different, it's messy and we all make mistakes. And so I think being willing to disclose sometimes a little bit about your own situation, and then, really mean it when you ask questions, so that they don't feel like they're just talking, that you're listening and following up. You care, you really care about what's going on in their lives.
That's really terrific advice, thank you. So I'll pivot a little bit about mentorship strategies. So how can mentors balance offering guidance without becoming overly directive or controlling, quotation marks, especially when mentees are looking for independence? So this might be a little bit more applicable to mentees who are in internal years of training, things like that. So do you have any discussion around that?
Yeah, I kind of think that goes to my point of, again, agree, disagree, of, the supervisor is the boss and or the mentor, right? So if you're saying like the mentor should give you things to do, I say that's more the supervisor's role, and then the mentor should just guide, like, this is my experience, this is, what I would maybe do in this situation, but everybody's different. And then you let the mentee take that information and make their own decisions on that perspective.
And maybe it comes back to those like check-in, those coffee meetings, right? Or sorry, where you kind of check to see like, how are you doing? What do you need at this point? And oftentimes at the start of many relationships, students or trainees might need a lot, and that changes. So just being able to self-reflect too, in terms of like being too directive, or has so-and-so got to the point now where they're really hitting their stride and I don't need to do this much anymore. I could be just that cheerleader at the back, so to speak, where it's like, go for it, you've got it.
So then is it up to the mentee to reach out, or is it up to the mentor to reach out, right?
Yeah,
If it's a boss, you have to reach out and say, you gotta get this stuff done.
Yeah.
But if you're the mentor, it's, well, when you come to me with a question, I'll help you through it. Yeah, that's just how I think about it.
And I guess it comes down to two, like a mentee has to come in with an idea of what they want out of this relationship as well. And so for me, when I was in my PhD and I decided that I was going to go down the academic route, I talked with my mentors and said, this is my goal and I need help learning how to write grants. I need to learn how to write papers, and I need to connect with the right people at the university. Can you help me with that? That's what I wanted out of that mentorship relationship at that time. And once I got a job, it became a different type of request. So it changed. So it comes down to the mentee making sure that they're articulating what they need at that point as well, as opposed to the mentor being a mind reader and just thinking they know what's
It's by direction.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But I guess it depends on the relationship you went down.
Yeah.
Developing with your mentors, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know if you guys as mentors, but as a mentor, I learn a lot from my teams, because I call them that you mentioned control. And I'm wondering, if that's not a word, is that because it's so bi-directional and the benefits so much for your although it's not widely published, but you do.
Yeah.
But you do, so recognizing that is very important to maintain that bi-direction of relationships, and so. Yeah, I mean, like the same way you said, I mean, I have a good relationship with friends and all of that, so I have a good relationship with my mentors, right? It's like, if I don't think there is one size fits all. But if you get it right, or you have some money, you can spend the phone, you can bring them home. You know, and finding opportunities to take that relationship. The first time that I think that I got an award, my motto was Bill Valley. And so I said, okay, celebrate this. I mean, it's my favorite position, my 10. I'm going to go Thai just to keep best nature and have dinner. And now it's a job. So every time I get something, Bill sends me a text and says, so I think it's just that part, you know, how do you keep that? Yeah, it's a relationship.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and I guess I'll probe a little bit more for specific examples if anyone wants to share. So was there a time as a mentor where you were in a situation where you thought, okay, maybe this person needs a little bit more independence and cheerleading from the back versus maybe this person needs a little bit more of, you know, me helping them achieve certain targets? And then I'll ask the same question to the mentees afterwards, like what were some situations in which you probe, you know, maybe I'm feeling confident enough to tackle this and, you know, it would be lovely to spearhead this, or versus I really need a little bit more support.
I mean, I guess I would say that both as a mentor and a mentee, and this has been sort of percolating as folks have been talking, is that particular dynamic where you're managing multiple roles in that relationship, right? How do you also be a supervisor as well as a mentor? And I think this is not a fully formulated thought, but like thinking back to my own experiences on sort of both sides of the coin, I think it's really like approaching supervision from a mentorship lens and allowing sort of mentees or students or, you know, workers, research assistants, whatever, to have like a sense of ownership over what they're working on and like really being invested in their growth in that sense and not so much in the outcome or the deliverable of whatever they have to do. Certainly that has to happen, but I think you sort of run into the situation of like of having that very prescribed controlling relationship that you may not necessarily want to if you're not invested in the growth of that person in any context. So I think sort of fostering an environment where you give them a task, but you allow them to have ownership of the task and you work through them with growing and developing the skills of that task. And I think that's sort of one way to counteract that tendency to be controlling and directed and sort of bring in that sort of shared decision making is not the word, but it's coming to mind on it. But you know, working through those things with them and sort of really being invested in their growth and their development, as opposed to just the outcome that you're looking for. And now I've forgotten the question.
No, I think
That works. Okay.
Okay. Yeah, personal account, but yeah, from a mentor perspective as well, if any of you want to share, was there, I guess I speak in clinical terms sometimes like a marker or something of your mentee like needing more or less support that they may not have verbalized that you can potentially share with other mentors. I guess it can be tricky, so we can.
I think it just happens over time, like as these relationships grow and you just learn about that person and what they need and how they work. Eventually you're just gonna know intuitively if they're doing well and you just back off. And I think it's just and it depends on each trainee. They're always different. So it's just I think it comes down to just being reflecting on it.
The word that keeps like floating into my head, and I've written it down as something to talk about too, is around expectations. And you know, like you didn't say expectations, but we were talking about that, right? In terms of like, you know, what are your expectations for me as the mentor, and what are my expectations of you and as the mentee, and how can we work together on this? And so I think in times when it hasn't gone so well for me, it's when maybe I didn't do that ground setting of being like, okay, this is the expectations and this is kind of how I can, you know, this is the feedback that I'm willing to give you, and and able to do that? Is that what you need? Rather than coming in hot, given feedback that's not accepted very well, you know, so, you know, I look on that as that was my fault in that is like looking back on it, it's like, okay, I wasn't really clear about how this should go, and I wasn't providing individualized support and like giving them the feedback that they needed, and then it didn't go well, so I think it's around expectations, and you know, sometimes we go through those, like I'm thinking more student supervisor things, but we have those forms right at the beginning that it's like, you know, rights and responsibilities and expectations. We kind of think about that as just like a checklist. But you can, I've now been mentored through it by someone else, you can take that as an opportunity to really like have those deeper conversations at the beginning about what this is going to look like, and not just the practical things about like, you know, when you need to send me something and I'll give you feedback on that, but like, how do you best learn in those situations, and would it be better for me to provide like email feedback before having a meeting, or, you know, like all of those little things can really make a difference. But like set the stage beforehand, and it is your job as the mentor to really do that, to start that conversation.
Thank you for sharing that with me. Okay, I'm just being mindful of the time as well, so I guess I will dump one question and go to another one. So what are some common mistakes, and it doesn't have to be a mistake, but things that you wish you did differently that mentors can make when trying to guide their mentees, and how can these be avoided? So I guess a prompt was, if you feel like you've done something that hasn't sat well for your relationship, like how do you go about rectifying that? And also from the mentee side, what should mentees keep in mind as they think about their relationship with their mentors when things are not going so well?
I think as a mentor, it's really important to check your blind spots and make sure that you're modeling the way. So you might say one thing, but you might be doing another. So the biggest thing in the academic world is like work-life balance.
Yeah.
I get students asking me that all the time, like, tell me about your work-life balance. And I can sit here and be like, oh, you know what, I have great work-life balance. And then I'll send them an email at 1 a.m.
Right.
And it's just like, it's completely wrong. Like you're not modeling that.
Yeah.
And so I think oftentimes it comes down to as a mentor, making sure if you're going to model something, you have to model it appropriately and be consistent in that. And sometimes that's hard to do, but also owning up to the fact that if you're not doing that, you're willing to have that conversation to say, like, I try and tell you about work-life balance, but I'm a terrible example of that. Like that's just how it goes sometimes.
Just be open. That's kind of the first thing I said, right? Just be open and honest of what worked, what didn't, what you're still struggling with. Work-life balance, obviously, I think that's a common theme in academia, but yeah, and just be vulnerable to an extent, right? You don't want to scare off your mentee either, but and then the uniqueness of the mentee. So some like the independence, and some like to be micromanaged to an extent too, right? So there's a big balance of that.
I also don't think like mentors ask for just direct feedback enough. Like just to straight up ask your mentee, like, what am I doing? Like, how am I doing? How can I help you more? Or like, how do you feel about my style? Because it's some like, there's just some, I think, situations where you just don't mesh, right? And in that case, I think it's a matter of connecting that person with people that are more, you know, structured or more aligned with them. But I think just straight up asking for feedback and asking, how am I doing? Like, how can I support you? And as the mentor, I think bringing that to the table opens up for the mentee to then actually provide, you know, that feedback, or provide some or have that conversation at least. So I think as a mentee, that's hard to come back and be like, I don't feel like I'm being supported enough, or I don't feel like you're doing X, Y, Z, especially in, you know, cases of a power dynamic potentially. So I think mentors sort of bringing that to the table themselves will be helpful.
Sometimes that requires, like, I think about the student supervisor relationship. You've got those hour-long meetings that you talk about your research, but sometimes maybe it's great to carve out a 10-minute chunk at the end of that, where it's around that mentor, like just not the work part, but more around the mentorship part, just having that built in. Because oftentimes it's just neglected, and then you try to find, it's like, okay, I gotta go, but having time to actually talk about it is actually be important too. So when you're thinking about doing that as a mentor, especially for the new students.
Absolutely. Okay, so I guess I'll ask Mariko if we have a lot of online questions. If not, I've got some more. Okay. Alright. Sounds good. So we'll keep the floor open to online questions. Please pop them in the chat if you have questions for our panelists here. But one thing that I'm very curious about, and I'll start asking them after I've given the audience here a chance to ask questions. So anyone want to bring up something that hasn't been discussed or share your own experiences about mentorship, being a mentor or mentee?
I've got a question.
Yeah.
How do you deal with situations, because oftentimes we are that mentor and boss role. And sometimes when you're the boss, stuff needs to get done, and if it's, I think a lot of discussions have been great, but it's all kind of been from the point of view that the mentee is great and the mentor is great, and we're all just trying to figure this out, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes the mentee is not doing the work, and there's stuff maybe going on in their personal life, maybe they're not performing professionally. And how do you, when you've tried to cultivate this mentorship relationship, but you're also the boss, and now you have to be the bad guy and be the bad boss and be like, well, you told me you're gonna send me this 3 weeks ago, I still don't have it, or this work you sent me is not up to par. Like, you know, how do you give that critical feedback without damaging your mentorship relationship? And that's something I struggle with, is that, yeah, when it's a great trainee, it's fantastic, and it's no problem. When you run into a trainee or a mentee who's struggling, then there's friction in the relationship.
Great question.
I have no good answer for that. It's like, that's a very hard question.
I mean, yeah, it is, and it's a really good point, right? So I'm in the advisor role with CHS, so a lot of times when I get called in, it is with situations like that, and but I think that goes back to my point of like the board of directors thing, and so yeah, call in somebody else in those situations too, maybe have somebody else to support you in that, work with the student. But it is tricky because, I mean, I've been on the other side of it too as a supervisor, and sometimes it all breaks apart too, and if it's too much critical feedback or it's not going well. But I think that's okay too. Like, I think we need to acknowledge that sometimes student supervisor relationships do break down, and a different supervisor is a better fit, or, you know, like these are really complex relationships, and yeah, when that goes well, like you said, and it's smooth, it's like, right, this is great. But sometimes for a variety of reasons, it just doesn't. And so, like, yeah, maybe first step is trying to bring somebody else in, or if you have a co-supervisor and trying to support the student that way, or committee members to kind of help out or be support there. But sometimes, yeah, it just breaks down, and that's okay too. Like, yeah, I don't want it to all seem like it's all like rose colored glasses. So
Yeah.
thank you for bringing that
That's a
up.
really good point, Dave. Like,
Yeah.
maybe there's a point where if the priority is the work and it's being a boss, then maybe it's the best bet would be that, you know what, maybe there's a better mentorship relationship in this scenario.
Yeah.
And
I'll be the
I'm
boss.
gonna be your boss in
You're
this
a
scenario,
mentor.
but I can set
Right.
you up with someone that can provide you similar advice or similar guidance. And then it takes that onus off of you of trying to balance these two and just like struggling with both in that scenario. Yeah. It's,
Like related to that, just to add to that as well, that I think when being on the other side of that as well,
Yeah.
I think when you have a relationship that is sort of built on that trust and like respect, that critique doesn't come across as being the bad guy. I think that critique comes across as still rooted in the person's growth and rooted in their development. And the whatever sort of advice comes out of that, I think it's still sort of like rounded in that mentorship relationship positively, as opposed to you're now putting on this bad person hat that like, I need these things done. So I think it sort of just goes back to having that basis of a good mentorship relationship where you can then have those more candid, you know, conversations and not have it be received negatively.
I think you could always have like a reset too, like, so you have like an initial roles and responsibilities. If things are going off the rails, just, okay, let's have a reset, let's revisit our roles and responsibilities, like, can we tweak some things, or what do we need going forward?
Is it possible to make a common enemy, for example, for both the supervisor and the student? So for example, to make the master's program and the final thesis is the monster, you get to have a sit down with the student and be like, okay, this is the milestone that we need to achieve. This is what has been done thus far. And we're both in this problem together because I want you to graduate at some point in your future. You want to graduate at some point. This is the common goal that we have. And if you're not performing and tracking, like achieving the milestones or doing the quality of work that everyone finds sufficient, as well as your committee, then both of us are in trouble. So how can we do this together? I.e. sit down and get to work, and they'll keep on standing over you or something like this.
Those happen too late, those conversations, a lot of time,
Yeah.
which is the hardest part, right? Like, that's gonna be set up way earlier, that we'll have check-in meetings and talk about these
Yeah.
kind of things. Oftentimes we wait until it's like, it's a critical point, and then we're like, okay, we need an intervention here. But that's hard, right?
And that's building that trust, right, that the student and the supervisor feel. But I think that you're breaking it from the point of view of the boss, and that's slightly documents with you on roles and responsibilities, and you're not doing. And then you get frustrated, right? And so it does, is, you don't have a relationship of that to break up with. For involved. That's why I was asking, right, at the beginning, is how having the hands of being boss different the mentorship relationship, and in that case,
It can,
if you are the boss, then the student needs to understand that is not.
And I think unfortunately, or fortunately, like that supervisor is the boss first, I think. Right, 'cause-
That's the role, so what you're saying about expectations. My role here is supervising it and getting through these. And this is the contract that we have. You're going to do, let's sign it. And so expectation from the get-go, so the student finds. Or a mentor. And I've seen that happening, and there's nothing wrong with it, setting a model, setting a strategy. Not being a mentor.
So your hand up, did you have a question?
Yeah. But to kind of summarize under one point, I guess, I think that being more of a mentee role, if a mentor were to not kind of call me out if I wasn't with my kids to standard, I would be disappointed, because that is almost the whole point of mentorship, is that I need to learn to take that critical feedback. That if someone reacts poorly to it, that emotional response isn't your responsibility. And again, they also need to recognize that there is still a power dynamic, that you are their supervisor, you are their boss, and that has to come first. That I would want someone to give me that critical feedback. It's a disservice to me as my mentor if you're not willing. You're not willing to put yourself out of control space either. Because like no one's gonna enjoy it. It's awkward. It's, the first few meetings after awkward. It's like, oh yeah, remember that day? And then eventually it's up.
That's a really good point. I think what often happens is we don't formalize mentorship relationships at the start. It always happens just kind of like organically, and then we just assume that I'm Dave's mentor or vice versa, but we've never actually formalized that. And then when something becomes difficult, then it's hard to have those conversations. Whereas first off, if we had just talked before, like, Dave, I think of you as a mentor, and you know, could I come to you and we could talk about these things, but here's what I need from you. And just like setting out some grounders at the start, then it would be great to have those conversations and it wouldn't be as awkward versus having these kind of informal mentorship relationships where it's like, it's weird at the point you don't know what to do with that scenario. I don't know. I think formalizing mentorships is important.
I know we're reaching end of time, for this group. Okay, do we have
One more question.
one more question? Okay, anyone from the audience have any questions? Or points of discussion or examples, anything from your experience that you want to share? Or the panel?
Here's one thing I have, is that every relationship's different, right? It's
Yeah.
like, I think sometimes we get ourselves in trouble if we think of what an ideal mentorship relationship looks like. But because we're talking about human beings, like
Yeah.
each individual relationship is always gonna be different. And so for me, I just try to think like, well, maybe I had a better or different relationship with so-and-so, but I don't have to have the same relationship with every trainee. I think it's important that everybody has a mentorship network, a board of directors, but I don't have to be the end all be all for everyone. And there's sometimes a personality thing, like sometimes I mentor students or trainees or staff, and like, it just doesn't really work that well. They get the work done really well, like we don't jive, and that's fine.
And that's
I'm
okay.
happy to be the boss, and other times we get along super well, but the work doesn't happen very well. And so
Right.
like, I think just kind of constantly renegotiating these things is important and recognizing that it's not a one size fits all model.
Yeah.
I think like
That's
the
great-
pitfall in
great point.
academia is like thinking that your supervisor has to be a mentor.
Yes.
Or you as a supervisor have to be a mentor.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
can just also be a supervisor.
And
Or have that person be a
maybe they're a
supervisor.
great supervisor, but
Yeah.
not a great mentor.
Yeah, like think about like the bosses that you've had and like you're not talking to most of them probably. So.
These
I
bosses
feel
you had, no, just
Right.
kidding.
That's true, yeah. So I feel like there are some cases where you just have to accept that the relationship is the relationship and you might not get that from that person. But then again, like, I think maybe part of being a good academic supervisor is if you're not gonna be that person to support the network for the student to find that as well.
Thank you for bringing that. Perfect. I have one more question, if there is time. Okay, so I guess it'll be applicable to a lot of us. So a lot of times mentors will foster a mentee's growth and see their mentee transition away from a formal mentee role, right? So if you're supervising a postdoc, for example, who ends up getting a faculty position, now you're colleagues, how do you reset that relationship? Any quick advice on, I know it's a very complex issue. And then, so when you are colleagues, you might still be inclined as a mentee to think of that person as a formal mentor and vice versa. How do you continue to make sure that your mentorship and mentee relationship is evolving to ensure success of both of you?
Might be a hot take, but does it ever actually evolve? Like, if you're
Yeah,
going
yeah.
from a postdoc to a faculty member, that person, like, you would still have a base level of respect for them. They're still your senior. They still have had experiences that you haven't had. So if it wasn't like a formal supervisory relationship, but even if it was, I feel like that's sort of what you look to them for probably doesn't change that much,
Yeah.
right?
The relationship doesn't change, the questions change that are being
Yeah.
asked, right, in that scenario. Yeah. It's like, but also know that, yeah, mentorship relationship can end if they're no longer serving the purpose. That's okay, but you're right, a lot of times they do just kind of evolve into different things. And maybe you don't, like if I think about my mentors during my PhD, they're still my mentors, but I see them once every 6 months or once a year. It's like a check-in versus someone that's maybe more involved on a monthly basis.
I think sometimes it can end. I mean, the mentor that I had during my PhD, when I started my faculty job, I sat down and said, okay, well, mentor me through this. And they said, no, I was your mentor during your PhD and I don't have time to be your mentor. I've got other mentees and like, they're very clear with the expectations. And sometimes it hurt at the time, but like now I'm really grateful for how open it was, that it was like, it wasn't like, I'll just you to kind of shove me aside. It's like, go find a new mentor and help me connect with other mentors. But it was like, at least it was clear, like what the expectation was. And I think that's helpful too. Sometimes like, if the mentorship relation is too informal, we don't necessarily have those hard conversations. But it was actually really helpful to be like, no, you need somebody else now. So I was like, okay, well, and so I found somebody else. So that's helpful as well. It's very helpful to just be open and honest, I think, if it's beyond your capacity, right? And I think it's very fair, and it's fair that, you know, we can't mentor everybody that we encounter. And some of us have big teams and lots of trainees that come through, and I can't be a mentor to 30 or 40 people.
Yeah.
You know, that's too much. So totally a fair point that we, you know, just being open and transparent.
Yeah, that's good. I feel a lot of students, just that risk of dependency from a lot of people on you. And it's great that your supervisor could just say, like, I've got 5 other students that I need to focus on. I can't do, like, you're good to go, Dave. You're good, you know, like. Yeah, even though you might not feel like that, right? Honestly.
Yeah. No, I think
But
that's,
how did you feel about the?
Oh, not great. Not great. But I think in hindsight now, it was better to have been honest about it than be like, yeah, okay, I'll see you in 3 years for a next check-in, or like, you know, I have 5 minutes to mentor you. Like, you know, I think doing a poor job of mentorship is worse than being honest and saying, I can't do this, right? So
Absolutely, yeah.
at the time, it hurt a lot.
Harsh,
Yeah, it sounded harsh and it felt harsh, but now looking back years later, I can see that it was for the best.
yeah.
My PhD supervisor was the professor from my master's university, and he was at the U of A for a few years, and I was there, so I did a PhD with him, and then he went back to my class, and now he's retired, and he said, America, yeah. I guess that maybe twice a month, sometimes 3 times a month, I get a baby coffee. And they're not very much related to his research, but more related to mine. And putting me in contact with people you need to talk to, for example, person and Julia. Julie's doing a really good work on engagement. I'm going to put in content. And so he keeps me always like, I love it, but in the peak of business time for me, it was like, no, I don't want to open it.
Yeah.
But yeah, so, you know, I had a very good, mentor models, I would say.
It's okay to say no to things. I think there was a whole panel on saying, yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, right.
They're not opening, they make.
Yeah.
That's great. Okay, well, thank you, everyone. Thank you to our panelists, Paul, Levi, Tiffany, and Benedicta, for your time, for attending. Thank you to everyone who attended. Your experiences. Maybe this can be a regular thing. Thank you. Have a good day.
Yeah.